In New Jersey, a new law went into effect on January 1st that eliminated a basic skills test that teachers would have to pass to become certified to teach, and an investigation conducted by Parents Defending Education revealing where $100 million of your tax dollars went that was supposed to address school violence. Joining us now is Erika, the Director of Outreach for Parents Defending Education. Erika, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. And let's start with this new law in New Jersey that will eliminate the requirement that a teacher candidate complete a basic skills test. Now, when you first hear this, red flags go up. But what are your thoughts on this? Is this the right move at this point?
I don't think it is. I mean, this is part of a trend. New Jersey's doing what New York has already done. It's important to know that the teachers union, specifically in this case, the NEA, pushed really hard for this. And I'm a former member of the NEA in two states, and generally whatever they push for tends to be something that's not particularly good for students. And so really the NEA wants to eliminate all barriers to teaching because that increases their number of dues paying members. And when that's your mission, student learning and quality control really aren't priorities at all. So that's a concern for sure. And I would also just say, having taken one of these tests, I think back in 1998, these are basic skills tests.
I was going to ask you, what is on these tests? Because it says basic, and I'm just thinking of basic. What are we talking about here?
So back when I took it in 1998 in Massachusetts, it was called a communication and literacy test. The test that New Jersey had is called the Praxis. So it included basic literacy, which meant reading, writing, and math. But again, these are low rigor tests. This is not, we're not talking about the LSAT here. And so the fact that the failure rates on these tests have been so high for so long, that is a problem. But that's really an indictment of not only the education system that these aspiring teachers are coming out of, but the colleges of education that give them a degree, even though they're not remotely qualified. They can't even pass, these basic minimum requirement tests, because the colleges of education get paid whether or not these graduates of theirs end up being able to get over these hurdles. So, but I think teacher shortages are real in some subjects, that is true, but eliminating the test requirement, in my opinion, does not bode well for students that are still, trying to recover from massive learning losses during the pandemic.
You got that right. Let's talk about your investigation that Parents Defending Education did. You just released this investigation revealing that something like $100 million the DOJ spent for DEI grants under programs that were intended to be used to address school violence. So what happened to this money?
Okay, so after we found over $1 billion in grants coming out of the DOE, the Department of Education, we decided to look to the Department of Justice as well, and we're quickly able to find $100 million there. Now, what the grants were for, and I'm going to use quotes here, this is the exact language, to increase school safety by implementing solutions that will improve school climate.
Okay.
But what we have seen has been the opposite. So we've seen more chaos, more disruption, and more violence as reported by staff, students, and parents. And it's largely, I think, because the grants aim to avoid punitive consequences. They don't want there to be disparities in their discipline data around suspensions especially. And so the goal is to try to keep the chronic disruptors and perpetrators of violence in the building. The problem is that doesn't work for everybody else, right? So you've got this sort of like consistent disruption where the focus becomes more on the perpetrator of this problem than on all of the other students that are ready to learn and all of the staff who are trying to teach them. So again, and I would also just say people need to know these grants are very targeted at what the Department of Justice calls disproportionately impacted groups. So you see a lot about LGBTQ and BIPOC, which we know stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color.
Now, just very quickly, give me an example, because we're not talking about where a student attacks someone else with a knife and they're trying to settle in school. Like, what type of things are happening here, how you're seeing these programs, how they try to get in and try to mediate these problems?
I mean, it may not be what you just described, but we definitely have seen a lot of fighting, a lot of chronic defiance, some really concerning behaviors towards fellow students and also towards staff, to the point where like the classes can't function and the buildings don't feel safe. What they feel is chaotic because they feel that rules are either not enforced at all or they're only enforced for certain students and not other students. And so there hasn't really been any evidence that anybody can point to that these grants are helping the situation. And on the contrary, you know, what we're seeing right now is much more disorder and chaos in our schools. And again, that's coming from, we're hearing that from staff, students, and parents. So that's a concern.
Well, if you want to see the report, I think they can go on your website. I'm going to look into it more because I find this very fascinating. Thank you, Erika Sanzi, for joining us, Parents Defending Education.
Thanks for having me. Have a nice weekend.
You too.